The rifle shot echoed across the canyon just as Fiona Keller's horse stumbled, sending her sprawling into the dust of Tombstone, Arizona's main street. And when she looked up through tangled auburn hair, she saw a tall cowboy with storm-gray eyes already moving toward the shooter's position while everyone else dove for cover. It was August 1881, and the desert heat shimmered above the packed earth like liquid glass. Fiona scrambled to her feet, ignoring the scrapes on her palms as another shot rang out, this time splintering the post beside her head. She didn't scream. She'd learned long ago that screaming accomplished nothing except making yourself a more interesting target. The cowboy moved with purpose through the chaos, his boots kicking up small clouds of dust as he navigated between the scattered bystanders and overturned wagons. He was broad-shouldered and lean, maybe 25 or 26 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from the same sandstone as the canyon walls. Fiona watched him disappear around the corner of the Mercantile, tracking the shooter who'd apparently decided that a Tuesday afternoon was the perfect time to start firing randomly into the street. She pressed herself against the wooden storefront, her heart hammering against her ribs. The horse that had thrown her, a rented mare from the livery stable, had bolted halfway down the street and was now standing near the saloon, sides heaving with panic. Fiona cursed under her breath. She'd only been in Tombstone for 3 hours, having arrived on the afternoon stage from Tucson, and already someone was shooting at her, or near her. She wasn't entirely sure which. The shooting stopped as abruptly as it had started. The silence that followed felt heavier than the gunfire, pressing down on the street like a physical weight. Slowly, cautiously, people began emerging from their hiding places, brushing off dust and checking for injuries. Fiona stayed where she was, watching the corner where the cowboy had disappeared. He reappeared 5 minutes later, walking calmly back toward the center of town with his hands relaxed at his sides. His gun remained holstered. Behind him, the sheriff and 2 deputies were hauling a skinny man in a torn vest, his hands bound with rope. The shooter was ranting about claims and theft and justice, his voice high and frantic. The cowboy's eyes scanned the street until they found Fiona. He changed direction, walking straight toward her with an easy confidence that made her stand up straighter despite herself. Up close, she could see that his eyes weren't just gray but had flecks of blue in them, like storm clouds breaking apart to reveal sky. "You hurt?" His voice was deep and rough, like gravel sliding across leather. "No." Fiona brushed dust from her dark blue traveling dress, aware that she probably looked like she'd been dragged behind a stagecoach. "Thank you for whatever you did," talked him down. The cowboy tilted his head slightly, studying her face. He was drunk and angry about someone jumping his claim, wasn't actually aiming at anyone specific, just shooting at the world in general. "How fortunate for the world that you intervened." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Preston Garrett, most people call me Press. Fiona Keller." She held out her hand and he shook it with a grip that was firm but not crushing. His palm was calloused, his fingers warm against hers. "You're new to Tombstone." It wasn't a question. Fiona nodded anyway. "Arrived on the stage this afternoon. I'm supposed to be meeting my cousin at the Grand Hotel, but I thought I'd walk around first, get a sense of the town. The livery owner suggested I rent a horse instead. Walking's probably safer." Press glanced at the mare, which was now being collected by a young boy from the stable. "That's Daisy. She's got a nervous disposition." "I noticed." They stood there for a moment, neither quite ready to end the conversation but neither entirely sure how to continue it. The street around them was returning to normal with remarkable speed. A woman was sweeping broken glass from the boardwalk. Two men were riding an overturned barrel. The saloon doors swung open, and tinny piano music spilled out into the afternoon heat. "Your cousin expecting you at any particular time?" Press asked. "Before supper." Fiona pulled a watch from her pocket and checked it. The crystal was cracked from her fall, but the mechanism still worked. "I have about 2 hours. Let me buy you a coffee." Make up for Tombstone's poor first impression. Fiona knew she should probably decline. She didn't know this man, and despite his heroics with the drunk shooter, her mother's voice echoed in her head with warnings about cowboys and frontier towns, and the general untrustworthiness of men who wore guns on their hips. But her mother was dead, had been for 6 years now, and Fiona had crossed half of Arizona territory precisely because she was tired of living her life according to the voices of ghosts. "Coffee sounds good," she said. They walked to a small restaurant 3 doors down from where the shooting had occurred. The place was clean and bright, with checkered curtains on the windows, and the smell of fresh bread making Fiona's stomach remind her that she hadn't eaten since breakfast in Tucson. Press held the door for her, then led her to a table near the back, away from the windows. A woman in her 50s appeared with a coffee pot and 2 cups almost before they'd sat down. "Preston Garrett, you causing trouble again." "Just preventing it, Miss Dorothy." "That drunk fool could have killed someone." Dorothy poured coffee that looked thick enough to stand a spoon in. "Sheriff's probably going to have him cooling his heels in jail for a week at least. You want anything to eat?" Press looked at Fiona, who nodded. "2 slices of whatever pie you've got." "Apple today." Dorothy disappeared into the back. Fiona wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, grateful for something to do with them. "Do you make a habit of talking down armed drunks only when they're interrupting my afternoon?" Press added sugar to his coffee, stirred it slowly. "I was at the gunsmith's getting some work done on my rifle when the shooting started. Seemed rude not to intervene. Very civic-minded of you. My mother raised me right." There was something in his voice when he said it, a tenderness that made Fiona look at him more carefully. She passed 2 years ago, always said that a man's measure was in what he did when no one was forcing him to do anything. My mother used to say something similar. Fiona sipped the coffee. It was strong enough to strip paint. "She died when I was 19. Fever. I'm sorry." They sat with that for a moment, sharing the particular silence of people who understood loss. Dorothy returned with enormous slices of apple pie, the crust golden and flaky, the filling still warm. Fiona realized she was ravenous. "So what brings you to Tombstone?" Press asked after they'd both made significant progress on their pie. "Besides your cousin." Fiona set down her fork, considering how much to tell him. The truth was complicated and personal, but there was something about this cowboy with his steady eyes and his calm competence that made her want to be honest. "I'm running away," she said finally. "Not from the law or anything dramatic like that. From expectations, I suppose. From a life that everyone else had planned out for me." Press nodded slowly. "What kind of life?" "The kind where I marry a banker's son in Philadelphia and have 5 children and host dinner parties and slowly disappear into wallpaper and good china." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. "My father died 3 years ago. Left me enough money to live on, but everyone in Philadelphia seemed to think that meant I needed their guidance on how to spend it, particularly on securing an appropriate husband." "And you didn't want to be secured." "I didn't want to be appropriate." Fiona took another bite of pie, gathering her thoughts. "My cousin Sarah, she moved out here 2 years ago with her husband. He's a doctor. They write to me about how different everything is, how much wider the sky seems, how people care more about what you can do than who your family was. It sounded like exactly what I needed." Tombstones, all of those things, Press said. It's also dusty and hot and occasionally full of drunk people shooting at the sky. But yeah, there's something about it. Room to breathe. What's your story? Fiona asked. What brought you here? Press finished his coffee before answering. Cattle. I came up from Texas with a drive about 4 years ago. Most of the crew went back, but I stayed. Liked the look of the place. The desert grows on you if you give it a chance. Now I work for the Grayson Ranch about 10 miles outside of town. Manage their livestock operations. So you're a cowboy. I suppose I am. He smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. Though I do try to avoid the parts where I get shot at or trampled by cattle. How's that working out? About as well as your attempt to ride Daisy. Fiona laughed, surprising herself with how natural it felt. They finished their pie and coffee, talking about nothing and everything. Press told her about the ranch, about the work of managing several hundred head of cattle in desert country, about the monsoons that would start in another month and turn the dry washes into raging rivers. Fiona told him about Philadelphia, about her work as a teacher before her father died, about the library she'd helped organize for the neighborhood children. When she finally checked her watch again, she was startled to realize that nearly 2 hours had passed. I need to go. Sarah will worry if I'm late. Press stood when she did, leaving coins on the table for Dorothy. I'll walk you to the hotel. You don't have to, I know. They walked slowly through Tombstone streets as the afternoon light turned golden. The town was smaller than Philadelphia, but larger than Fiona had expected, with solid buildings of wood and adobe standing alongside canvas tents and temporary structures. The Grand Hotel was one of the nicer establishments, a 2-story building with a wide front porch and actual glass windows. Sarah was waiting in the lobby, and she flew across the room when she saw Fiona, grabbing her in a hug that squeezed the air from her lungs. Fiona! Oh, I was starting to worry. The stage was supposed to arrive 2 hours ago. It did. I got distracted. Fiona returned the hug, breathing in the familiar scent of Sarah's lavender soap. Her cousin looked well, her face tan and healthy, her dark hair pulled back in a practical bun. She'd put on a little weight since Fiona had last seen her, and it suited her. Sarah pulled back, her eyes moving from Fiona to Press and back again, her expression shifting to something between curiosity and concern. Distracted. There was some shooting, Fiona said. Mr. Garrett helped resolve the situation. Then we had coffee. Some shooting. Sarah's voice was flat. Fiona, you've been in Tombstone for 2 hours. It wasn't my fault. It never is. But Sarah was smiling as she said it. She turned to Press, extending her hand. Sarah Mitchell, thank you for looking after my cousin, Press Garrett. And she looked after herself just fine. Didn't panic, didn't scream, just got out of the line of fire and stayed there. That sounds like Fiona. Sarah linked her arm through Fiona's. Will you join us for supper, Mr. Garrett? It's the least we can offer after you kept my cousin from getting shot on her first day in town. Press hesitated, and Fiona found herself hoping he'd say yes. I don't want to intrude on your reunion. You wouldn't be intruding, Fiona said, more quickly than she'd intended. Please. I'd like to hear more about the area, and Sarah's husband should meet you. He'll want to thank you properly. All right then. Thank you. Press glanced down at his dusty clothes, though I should probably clean up first. 6 o'clock in the hotel restaurant, Sarah said. And Mr. Garrett, truly thank you for watching out for her. They watched him leave, his long strides carrying him quickly down the street. Sarah waited exactly 3 seconds before turning to Fiona with raised eyebrows. So, a cowboy, don't start. I'm not starting anything. I'm just observing. You've been here for 2 hours and you've already found the handsomest man in Tombstone. Sarah steered Fiona toward the stairs. "Come on, I'll show you your room. It's just down the hall from ours. And then you're going to tell me everything." Fiona's room was small but comfortable, with a real bed and a washstand and a window that looked out over the street. Her trunk had already been delivered from the stage depot, sitting at the foot of the bed waiting to be unpacked. Sarah sat on the room's single chair while Fiona washed the dust from her face and hands, and she told her cousin about the shooting, about Press appearing like something out of a dime novel, about the coffee and the pie and the unexpected ease of their conversation. "He sounds nice," Sarah said when Fiona had finished. "And if he works for the Grayson Ranch, that's a good sign. Joseph knows the Graysons, says they're solid people, fair employers. Mr. Grayson is on the town council." "It was just coffee, Sarah. I know, but you like him." Fiona couldn't deny it, so she didn't try. "I just got here. I'm not looking for anything romantic. I came here to figure out who I am without everyone else's expectations pressing down on me. And maybe who you are includes being someone who falls for a handsome cowboy." Sarah stood, smoothing her skirts. "I'm not saying you have to marry him, Fiona. I'm just saying don't close yourself off to possibilities just because they're not what you planned. Sometimes the best things are the ones we never saw coming." Sarah had met her husband Joseph on a train to Chicago, both of them escaping from parties they didn't want to attend. They'd been engaged within 6 weeks and married a month after that. By all accounts, they were absurdly happy together. Fiona had been skeptical at first, worried that Sarah was rushing into something, but the letters she'd received over the past 2 years had been full of such genuine joy that her doubts had faded. "I'll keep an open mind," Fiona promised. "That's all I ask." Sarah headed for the door. "Now finish getting ready. Joseph should be here soon, and I want him to meet you properly before supper. He's been looking forward to your visit for weeks." Fiona changed into a fresh dress, a light green one that her mother would have said was too informal for dinner, but that Fiona had always loved because it was comfortable and made her eyes look brighter. She brushed out her hair and pinned it up, studying her reflection in the small mirror above the washstand. Her face was thinner than it had been a year ago, sharpened by grief and stress, and the exhausting work of deflecting her aunt's constant attempts at matchmaking. But there was color in her cheeks now, put there by the desert sun, and, she had to admit, by the prospect of seeing Preston Garrett again. Joseph Mitchell turned out to be exactly the kind of man Fiona would have wanted for her cousin. He was tall and gentle-spoken, with laugh lines around his eyes and the steady hands of someone who'd spent years setting bones and stitching wounds. He embraced Fiona like she was already family, welcomed her to Arizona with genuine warmth, and made no comments whatsoever about her unconventional decision to travel across the country alone. "Sarah's been counting the days until you arrived," he said as they headed down to the restaurant. "She misses Philadelphia sometimes, not the city exactly, but the people. I miss her too." Fiona squeezed Sarah's hand. "Though I'm planning to make up for lost time, I'm hoping to stay for a while if you'll have me." "Stay as long as you like," Joseph said. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask if you'd be interested in some work while you're here. The town's been talking about starting a proper school, something beyond the informal lessons the minister's wife gives on Sundays. When Sarah told me you'd taught in Philadelphia, I thought you might be interested in helping get it organized. I'd love that." Fiona felt a flutter of excitement. Teaching was one of the few things she genuinely loved about her old life, the sense of opening up worlds for children who might never have seen them otherwise. "I don't know how long I'll be staying, but I'll help however I can." Press was waiting in the restaurant, cleaned up and wearing a fresh shirt. He stood when they entered, and Fiona introduced him to Joseph. The two men shook hands, sizing each other up in that way men did, and whatever they saw seemed to satisfy both of them. Dinner was roast beef and potatoes and vegetables that Joseph said came from the ranch where Press worked. The conversation flowed easily, moving from stories of Tombstone's rapid growth to debates about statehood for Arizona Territory to Joseph's descriptions of some of his more unusual medical cases. Press was quiet much of the time, but when he spoke, it was with a dry wit that made Fiona laugh. "So what made you decide to stay in Tombstone?" Fiona asked him as they finished their meal. "After the cattle drive. You said most of the crew went back to Texas." Press set down his coffee cup, considering the question. "I suppose I was looking for the same thing you are. Something different from what was expected. My father runs a ranch in Texas, wanted me to take it over eventually, but it's his dream, not mine. Being there, I always felt like I was trying to fit into a shape that wasn't quite right." He paused, then added quietly, "My mother understood. She told me to go find my own shape." "And have you?" Fiona asked. "Found it, I mean. Getting closer." His eyes met hers across the table, still working out some of the details. They talked until the restaurant staff started pointedly clearing tables around them. Joseph excused himself to check on a patient he'd seen earlier that day, promising to return within the hour. Sarah gave Fiona a knowing look, murmured something about needing to review the household accounts with the hotel manager, and disappeared after her husband, leaving Fiona and Press alone at the table. "Your cousin's not subtle," Press observed. "No, she never has been." Fiona traced the rim of her water glass with one finger. "I'm sorry if she made you feel obligated to stay." "I don't feel obligated." He leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "I'm staying because I want to." The directness of it caught Fiona off guard. In Philadelphia, conversations between men and women were layered with hints and implications, everything wrapped in propriety and plausible deniability. This kind of honesty was both refreshing and terrifying. "I want you to stay too," she said, matching his directness with her own. They moved to the hotel's front porch, where there were chairs arranged to catch the evening breeze. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and deep purple. The temperature was dropping as the light faded, the desert giving up its heat in a way that seemed almost generous after the blazing afternoon. "Tell me about the ranch," Fiona said. "What's it like, working there?" Press stretched his legs out in front of him, his boots worn but well cared for. "It's hard work, but good work. The Graysons run about 500 head of cattle, plus horses. I manage the day-to-day operations, oversee the hands, make decisions about when to move the herd to different pastures. It requires understanding the land, knowing where the water is, predicting what the weather's going to do. Every day is different. Do you miss Texas?" "Sometimes. I miss my mother. I write to my father regularly, but we're not close. He didn't understand why I needed to leave." Press was quiet for a moment, then added, "He wanted me to marry a girl from the neighboring ranch. Nice girl, but we'd known each other since we were children. We were friends, nothing more. She didn't love me, and I didn't love her, but my father couldn't see why that mattered. Said love came with time and shared work." "Maybe it does for some people," Fiona said softly, "but it seems like a cold way to start a life together. That's what I thought." Press turned to look at her. "What about you? Was there someone in Philadelphia you're running from?" "Not running from exactly. There was a man my aunt was pushing me toward. Edmund Hastings, son of her banker. He was perfectly fine, polite, educated, appropriate." She said the word with distaste. "We had nothing in common. He wanted a wife who would organize his household and raise his children, and not bother him with thoughts or opinions. When I told him I wasn't interested, He seemed more relieved than disappointed. I think he was only courting me because his mother and my aunt had decided it would be a good match. Their loss is Tombstone's gain. Fiona felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the desert air. You're very forward, Mr. Garrett. Press, and yes, I am. Life's too short to pretend I don't mean what I'm saying. He hesitated, then asked, Is it unwelcome, the forwardness? No. Fiona met his eyes. It's not unwelcome. They sat together as the stars began appearing overhead, brighter and more numerous than Fiona had ever seen in Philadelphia. Press pointed out constellations, telling her their names and the stories attached to them. His voice was low and warm, and Fiona found herself leaning closer to hear him, their shoulders almost touching. When Joseph and Sarah returned, they found them like that, heads tilted back to watch the sky. Sarah smiled but didn't comment. Joseph suggested they all have breakfast together the next morning, and Press agreed before excusing himself for the night. He had to be at the ranch early, he explained, but he'd be back in town by midday tomorrow. I'd like to see you again, he said to Fiona as he prepared to leave. If you'd like that too, I would. She stood, suddenly not wanting him to go. Maybe you could show me around Tombstone properly without the gunfire this time. I'll do my best. He touched the brim of his hat in farewell. Miss Keller, Dr. and Mrs. Mitchell, good night. They watched him walk away into the darkness, his figure quickly swallowed by shadows. Sarah linked her arm through Fiona's. Oh, you're in trouble. I know. Fiona couldn't stop smiling, but maybe that's all right. She slept better that night than she had in months, her dreams full of desert landscapes and storm-gray eyes. When she woke, the sun was already bright through the window, and she could hear the sounds of Tombstone coming to life. Horses in the street, voices calling greetings, the distant ring of a blacksmith's hammer. Breakfast with Sarah and Joseph was a lively affair, with Sarah peppering Fiona with questions about her journey and her impressions of the town, while Joseph read through his correspondence and occasionally interjected comments. Press didn't join them, which Fiona told herself was perfectly fine even though she kept glancing at the restaurant door. After breakfast, Sarah took Fiona on a proper tour of Tombstone. The town was bustling, full of miners and cowboys and merchants and people from every corner of the country, all drawn by silver strikes in the nearby hills and the promise of opportunity. Sarah pointed out the important buildings, the courthouse, the newspaper office, the various saloons and gambling halls that seemed to outnumber everything else. It's not Philadelphia, Sarah said as they walked, but it has its own kind of energy. Things are happening here, you can feel it. The silver mines are producing more every month. People are making fortunes and losing them just as fast. It's exciting. They stopped at the building that might become the schoolhouse, currently being used as a storage facility. It was a good size, with windows on two sides and a solid roof. Joseph had arranged for Fiona to meet with some of the town council members later in the week to discuss the school proposal. It needs work, Sarah said, looking around at the dusty interior, but it has potential. Fiona could already see it, desks arranged in rows, a chalkboard on the front wall, shelves for books. It's perfect. They were heading back toward the hotel when Fiona saw Press riding into town on a gray horse. He spotted them and changed direction, pulling up alongside them with easy grace. Miss Keller, Mrs. Mitchell. He touched his hat. I was hoping I'd run into you. Fiona, if you're free this afternoon, I thought I could show you the area around town, on horseback if you're willing to try again. I promise to provide a calmer mount than Daisy. I'd like that. Fiona looked at Sarah. Did we have plans? Nothing that can't wait. Sarah's smile was knowing. You two go ahead. I need to meet with the ladies' auxiliary about the church fundraiser anyway. Press dismounted, leading his horse as they walked back to the livery stable. He moved with the loose-limbed confidence of someone completely comfortable in his own skin, and Fiona found herself watching the way the sunlight caught in his dark hair, the way his hands rested easy on the reins. At the stable, he introduced her to a sweet-tempered bay mare named Penny. "She's mine," he explained, "but she's patient with new riders, won't spook at shadows like Daisy." Fiona had ridden as a child, though it had been years since she'd been on a horse. Press helped her into the saddle, his hand steadying her until she found her balance. His touch was brief and proper, but Fiona felt it like a brand, warm through the fabric of her riding dress. They rode out of town heading north, following a trail that wound through Ocotillo and Prickly Pear. The landscape was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all sharp edges and muted colors under the endless blue sky. Press rode beside her, pointing out landmarks and telling her about the land. "The monsoons will start next month," he said. "When they come, this whole desert transforms. Everything that looked dead suddenly blooms. It's like the land was just sleeping, waiting for the right moment. I'd like to see that. Stick around and you will." He glanced at her. "How long are you planning to stay? I'm not sure yet." Fiona shifted in the saddle, still finding her rhythm with the horse's movement. "As long as it feels right, I suppose. I have enough money to support myself for a while, and if this school project works out, that might turn into steady employment. Part of me wants to stay forever. Part of me is terrified of making that commitment." "What are you afraid of?" It was a simple question, but it cut right to the heart of things. Fiona took her time answering, watching the way heat waves shimmered above the distant mountains. "I'm afraid of choosing wrong again. Of building a life here and then realizing it's not what I wanted either. Of always being the person who runs away when things get difficult." "Is that what you think you're doing? Running away?" "Aren't I?" Press pulled his horse to a stop, and Fiona did the same. They'd reached a small rise that looked out over a valley dotted with mesquite trees. In the distance, she could see cattle grazing, dark shapes against the pale earth. "I don't think you're running away," Press said carefully. "I think you're running towards something. There's a difference. Running away is about fear. Running toward is about hope. And what am I running toward? That's what you're here to find out." He smiled at her. "But for what it's worth, I'm glad you came. Even if it was just for coffee and a sunset, I'm glad I met you." Fiona felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. "I'm glad too." They rode for another hour, following the valley until it opened up into wider country. Press showed her the boundaries of the Grayson Ranch, the network of wells and water holes that kept the cattle alive in the desert, the lined shacks where ranch hands could shelter during storms or overnight watches. He talked about the work with genuine passion, and Fiona understood that this wasn't just a job for him. It was a calling, a way of being in the world that made sense to him. When they finally turned back toward Tombstone, the sun was past its zenith and beginning its long slide toward evening. Fiona was sore from riding, her body remembering muscles she'd forgotten she had, but she felt more alive than she had in years. "Thank you for today," she said as they approached the livery stable, "for showing me all of this. It was my pleasure." Press helped her down from the horse, his hand spanning her waist. For a moment they stood very close, close enough that Fiona could see the exact color of his eyes, gray shot through with blue like summer storms over the desert. Then he stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself. "Will I see you tomorrow? I hope so. There's a dance Saturday night, town hall. Would you like to go with me?" "Yes," Fiona didn't hesitate. "I'd like that very much." His smile was like sunrise, bright and full of promise. Good, that's good. They stood there grinning at each other like fools until one of the stable boys cleared his throat pointedly. Press handed over the horses, arranged their care, and walked Fiona back to the hotel. At the door, he touched his hat and said goodbye, and Fiona watched him walk away with a feeling that she was standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful. Sarah was waiting in Fiona's room, ostensibly to help her change out of her riding clothes, but actually to demand a full report on the afternoon. Fiona told her everything while Sarah unlaced her boots and helped her into a comfortable dress. "He asked me to the dance Saturday," Fiona said, unable to keep the smile off her face. "Of course he did." Sarah sat on the bed, looking pleased. "Joseph said he's well respected around town. The Graysons trust him completely, which is high praise, and he's clearly smitten with you." "It's too fast, isn't it?" Fiona sank into the room's chair. "I've known him less than 2 days. When Joseph and I met, he proposed after 3 weeks. I said yes after 4. Sarah's expression turned serious. "I'm not saying you need to marry him, Fiona. But don't talk yourself out of something good just because it's happening quickly. Sometimes things are fast because they're right." That night at dinner, Joseph mentioned casually that Press had excellent references, was known for his integrity and fair dealing, and had once spent an entire night helping deliver a breech calf in a rainstorm. Sarah kicked him under the table, but she was smiling when she did it. The next few days fell into a comfortable pattern. Mornings, Fiona met with Joseph and some of the town council members to plan the school. They were enthusiastic about the project, especially when Fiona outlined her ideas for a curriculum that would include practical skills alongside traditional academics. She'd learned in Philadelphia that children needed to see how learning connected to their lives, and in a frontier town like Tombstone, that meant teaching surveying alongside geometry, chemistry through mining principles, history through the stories of the people who'd settled the territory. Afternoons, when Press could get away from the ranch, they explored Tombstone together. He showed her the mining operations, keeping a safe distance but close enough that she could see the massive machinery pulling silver ore from the earth. They visited the newspaper office, where the editor regaled them with stories of frontier journalism. They had dinner with Joseph and Sarah, and gradually, Fiona began to feel less like a visitor and more like someone building a life. Saturday arrived bright and hot. Fiona spent the afternoon with Sarah, trying on dresses and fussing with her hair in a way that felt simultaneously silly and necessary. She settled on a dress of deep blue silk that she'd brought from Philadelphia, one of the few fancy things she'd packed. It made her eyes look almost green, and the neckline was just low enough to be interesting without being scandalous. "You look beautiful," Sarah said, and meant it. Press arrived at 6, clean-shaven and wearing dark trousers and a vest over a white shirt. He'd left his gun behind, Fiona noticed, though that probably meant he had a knife somewhere. Most men in Tombstone went armed, even to dances. The town hall was already crowded when they arrived, full of people dressed in their best and clearly ready to enjoy themselves. A band was setting up in one corner, fiddle, guitar, and a man with a harmonica. The air smelled of perfume and whiskey, and the particular excitement of a community gathering to celebrate itself. Press led Fiona onto the dance floor as the music started, a lively reel that had half the room clapping and stomping. He was a surprisingly good dancer, light on his feet and confident in his movements. Fiona had to concentrate to keep up, but the energy of it was infectious, and soon she was laughing, breathless and exhilarated. They danced 3 dances before taking a break, retreating to the refreshment table for punch that tasted suspiciously like someone had spiked it with something stronger. Sarah and Joseph found them there, and they stood together watching the crowd swirl and spin. "Fiona, I should mention," Joseph said during a lull in the music. "The council officially approved the school project yesterday. They're allocating funds to renovate the building and purchase supplies. They'd like you to be the head teacher if you're interested. The pay isn't much, but it comes with a small house and you'd have free rein to structure the curriculum however you think best." Fiona's breath caught. That's wonderful. I'd love to. Thank you." "Thank Press," Joseph said. "He's the one who convinced Mr. Grayson to support it, and once Grayson was on board, the rest of the council fell in line." She turned to Press, who looked slightly embarrassed. "You didn't mention you were lobbying for the school." "I mentioned that I thought it was a good idea," he said carefully. "That having a real teacher would be valuable for the community." Mr. Grayson agreed. "That's not quite how he told it," Joseph said with a grin. According to Grayson, Press spent an entire afternoon explaining why education was the foundation of civilization, and how towns that invested in schools attracted better settlers and grew faster. Apparently, it was very persuasive. Press shrugged, looking uncomfortable with the attention. "I believe in what you're doing," seemed worth supporting. Fiona wanted to kiss him right there in front of everyone, but she settled for touching his hand briefly. "Thank you." The music started again, slower this time, and Press led her back onto the floor. This dance was different, a waltz that required them to stay close, his hand on her waist, hers on his shoulder. They moved together easily, and Fiona realized that she trusted him completely to lead, to keep her from stumbling. "So you're staying," Press said softly. "It looks that way." Fiona met his eyes. "Is that all right?" "It's better than all right." He pulled her fractionally closer. "Fiona, I know this is fast. I know we've only known each other a week, but I need to tell you something." Her heart was suddenly racing. "What?" "I'm falling for you." The words were simple, direct, honest. "I've been trying to take it slow, trying not to rush you or scare you off. But I can't stop thinking about you. When I'm at the ranch, I'm counting the hours until I can come back to town. When I'm with you, everything else just falls away. You're smart and brave and funny, and talking to you is the easiest thing I've ever done. I'm falling for you, and I needed you to know." They'd stopped dancing, standing still in the middle of the floor while couples spun around them. Fiona felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, ready to jump, terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. "I'm falling for you too," she whispered. "It scares me how much. I came here to find myself, to figure out who I am without everyone else's expectations. And then you appeared, and suddenly all I want is to be near you. Is that wrong? Am I just replacing one set of expectations with another?" "I don't have expectations," Press said fiercely. "I don't want you to be anything except exactly who you are. If teaching makes you happy, teach. If you want to spend your days reading or riding or doing nothing at all, that's fine too. I don't want to own you or control you or shape you into something I've imagined. I just want to be with you, whatever that looks like." "You mean that?" "Every word." Fiona made her decision in that moment, standing in the middle of a dance floor in Tombstone, Arizona, with a cowboy's arms around her and her whole future stretching out ahead of her like the desert sky. She was done running, done second-guessing, done letting fear make her choices. "Kiss me," she said. Press blinked. "Here, in front of everyone, here. Now." He kissed her and the room fell away. His lips were warm and gentle, asking rather than demanding, and Fiona leaned into him with a sense of coming home. Around them, she was dimly aware of cheering and laughter, but it didn't matter. Nothing mattered except this moment, this man, this feeling of absolute rightness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah was standing nearby with tears in her eyes and Joseph was grinning like a fool. Half the town seemed to be watching them with various expressions of approval, amusement, or satisfaction. "Well," Press said, his voice rough, "I guess we're not keeping this quiet." "I don't want to keep it quiet." Fiona took his hand, lacing their fingers together. "I want everyone to know that you're mine and I'm yours." They stayed at the dance for another hour, but Fiona barely noticed the music or the people around them. She was too focused on Press, on the feel of his hand in hers, on the way he looked at her like she was something precious and rare. When they finally left, walking slowly back through Tombstone streets under a blanket of stars, she felt drunk on happiness despite having barely touched the spiked punch. At the hotel, Press walked her to the door of her room. The hallway was empty and dark, lit only by a single lamp at the far end. They stood close together, neither wanting the evening to end. "I should let you get some rest," Press said, though he made no move to leave. "Probably." Fiona didn't step back. "When will I see you again?" "Tomorrow." "I need to be at the ranch early, but I could come back in the afternoon. We could have dinner, or you could stay." The words were out before Fiona could second-guess them. "Not like that," she added quickly, seeing his expression. "I mean, Sarah and Joseph are just down the hall." "But we could talk. I'm not ready for tonight to end." Press hesitated, clearly torn between propriety and desire. "If we do this, if we keep seeing each other like this, people are going to talk. They're probably already talking after that kiss. Let them talk." Fiona unlocked her door, pushed it open. "I didn't come all this way to live by Philadelphia's rules. If I want to invite a man to my room to talk, that's my choice. Just talk, for now." She met his eyes. "Press, I'm not going to pretend I don't want you, but I also want to do this right. I want to know you, really know you. I want to build something real, not just something fast." Understanding softened his face. "I want that too." They sat in her room with the door cracked open for propriety, talking in low voices as the hotel settled into sleep around them. Press told her about his mother, about growing up on a ranch that never quite felt like home, about the day he'd realized he needed to leave before he disappeared completely into his father's expectations. Fiona told him about the years after her parents' death, about the slow suffocation of well-meaning relatives trying to manage her life, about the moment she'd bought a train ticket west and felt like she could finally breathe. "I'll never be what you dream of," Fiona said suddenly, the words breaking free from some deep place inside her. "I'm not going to be a traditional wife, Press. I'm going to work, and I'm going to have opinions, and I'm going to make decisions about my own life. I'm difficult and stubborn and too independent for most men. If you're expecting me to transform into something soft and biddable, you're going to be disappointed." Press leaned forward, taking her hands in his. His eyes were serious and steady. "You're better than dreams. Dreams are just wishes you have while you're sleeping. They're not real. But you're real, and everything you just described, all the things you think make you difficult, those are the things I love about you. I don't want someone soft and biddable. I want someone who challenges me, who has her own life and her own thoughts. I want you, Fiona, exactly as you are." Tears pricked at Fiona's eyes. She'd never had someone look at her like that, like her independence was a gift rather than a flaw. "You're sure?" "I'm sure." He lifted her hands to his lips, kissed her knuckles gently. "You're better than any dream I could have imagined. You're real and complicated and wonderful, and I'm not letting you go." They talked until the sky outside her window began to lighten toward dawn. Press finally left with the sun rising, and Fiona fell into bed still wearing her dress, too tired and too happy to bother changing. She slept for 4 hours and woke feeling more rested than she had in months. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity and joy. The schoolhouse renovations began, and Fiona threw herself into the project with enthusiasm. She spent her days planning lessons and ordering supplies, interviewing families about their children's needs, organizing a library from donated books. Sarah helped when she could, and Joseph recruited several of his patients to help with the physical labor of cleaning and repairing the building. Press came to town whenever he could spare the time, which turned out to be most evenings and many afternoons. They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side on the school during the day, stealing moments together in the evenings. The town watched their courtship with approval and amusement, and if anyone thought it was too fast or too public, they kept those opinions to themselves. 1 month turned into 2. The monsoons arrived right on schedule, transforming the desert exactly as Press had promised. Fiona stood on the hotel porch during one storm, watching lightning crack across the sky while rain came down in sheets, and felt like the land was welcoming her, acknowledging that she belonged here now. The school opened in September with 17 students ranging from 6 to 14 years old. Fiona's first day as head teacher was chaos and exhausting and absolutely perfect. The children were eager and curious, and within a week, she'd identified the ones who needed extra help and the ones who needed harder challenges. She loved every minute of it. Press proposed on a Sunday in October, taking her back to the rise where they'd stopped on their first ride together. The valley spread out below them, green from the monsoon rains, the cattle scattered like dark seeds across the earth. The sky was impossibly blue overhead. He didn't get down on one knee. Instead, he took her hands and said, "I want to build a life with you. Not a perfect life, because perfect isn't real, but a real life with all the mess and complications and joy that comes with it. Marry me, Fiona. Let's figure out what we're building together." Yes. She didn't need to think about it. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married in November, a small ceremony in the church with Sarah and Joseph standing up with them. Fiona wore a simple white dress that Sarah had helped her sew, and Press wore his best suit. The whole town seemed to turn out for the celebration afterward, and they danced until midnight under strings of lanterns hung between buildings. Press had been building them a house on a piece of land adjacent to the Grayson Ranch, a wedding gift from his employers who said they couldn't afford to lose their best foreman. The house was small but solid, with windows that faced east to catch the sunrise and a porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the desert light fade. Moving in together felt natural, like they'd been doing it forever. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small compromises and adjustments that made cohabitation work. Fiona kept teaching, riding into town each morning and returning in the late afternoon. Press managed the ranch, sometimes gone for days when he needed to take the cattle to distant pastures or deal with problems at the line shacks. Their first argument happened in December, over something stupid that neither of them would remember later. What Fiona would remember was how they'd fought fair. No cruel words or cheap shots, and how they'd made up afterward, learning that conflict didn't have to mean catastrophe. Winter in the desert was different from winter in Philadelphia. Cold but not brutal, the landscape brown and dormant rather than buried under snow. Fiona learned to appreciate the subtle beauties of the season, the way frost transformed cactus into crystal sculptures, the stark clarity of the light. Sarah announced she was pregnant in January, and Fiona spent an afternoon crying with joy for her cousin and closest friend. She and Press talked that night about children of their own, agreeing they wanted them but not yet, not until they'd had more time to just be married, just be together. The school thrived. By spring, Fiona had 23 students, and the town council was talking about building an addition to accommodate more. She started a lending library, organizing books donated from across the territory, and began teaching evening classes for adults who wanted to learn to read. In May, a year after Fiona had arrived in Tombstone, she and Press took a trip to Texas so she could meet his father. The ranch was enormous and impressive, and Press's father was a hard man but not unkind. He shook Fiona's hand and said, "You must be something special if you got my son to settle down." "He's the special one," Fiona replied, and meant it. Press's father looked between them, seeing something in their faces that seemed to satisfy him. "You're happy." "Very," Press said. "Then I'm happy." His father clapped him on the shoulder. "Your mother would have loved her." It was the closest he could come to approval, but it was enough. They returned to Arizona with a sense of completion, of doors closing gently on the past and opening wider on the future. Sarah's baby was born in late May, a son they named Thomas. Fiona held him when he was hours old, marveling at his tiny perfection, and saw Press watching her with an expression that made her heart ache with love. "Next year," she told him that night as they lay in bed with the windows open to catch the breeze. "Let's start trying next year. You're sure?" "I'm sure." She rolled over to face him. "I want to build a family with you. I want everything with you." They made love slowly, tenderly, and Fiona thought about how far she'd come from that terrified woman on a stagecoach, running towards something she couldn't name. She'd found it, found him, found herself, found home. Their daughter was born the following March, arriving 2 weeks early during a dust storm that made the whole world orange and howling. Joseph delivered her while Press paced outside, and Fiona worked through contractions with Sarah, holding her hand and whispering encouragement. The baby was small and perfect and had Press's gray eyes. They named her Rose after Press's mother. When Press held her for the first time, tears streaming down his face, Fiona felt a love so fierce it was almost frightening. "You're better than dreams," Press whispered. And Fiona knew he was talking to both of them, to his daughter and his wife, to the life they'd built from hope and choice and love. Rose grew into a fearless, curious child who loved horses and books in equal measure. She started walking at 9 months and was riding with her father by the time she was 2. Fiona went back to teaching when Rose was 6 months old, bringing the baby to school with her, until she was old enough to stay home with a neighbor during the day. Their son arrived 3 years after Rose, born on a bright summer morning with much less drama than his sister. They named him Henry, and he was calmer than Rose, more contemplative, with Fiona's auburn hair and Press's steady temperament. Press taught him to ride almost as soon as he could walk, and Fiona taught him to read before he was 4. The school continued growing. By the time Rose started attending as a student, there were 40 children enrolled, and the town had hired 2 additional teachers to help Fiona manage the load. She loved watching her daughter learn alongside children from every background, miners' kids and ranchers' kids and shopkeepers' kids, all sitting together. Life wasn't perfect. There were hard times. A drought year when the cattle struggled and money was tight. A bout of influenza that tore through Tombstone and took several people Fiona had considered friends. Moments when the weight of responsibility felt crushing. But they faced everything together, Press and Fiona, building a partnership that was stronger than anything either of them had imagined possible. On their 10th anniversary, Press took her back to the rise where he'd proposed. The children were staying with Sarah and Joseph, giving them a rare evening alone. They sat on a blanket as the sun set, sharing a bottle of wine and watching the sky turn impossible colors. "You ever regret it?" Press asked. "Staying here, marrying me, giving up the life you could have had in Philadelphia?" Fiona looked at him, this man who'd been her partner through everything, who still made her heart race when he smiled. "Not for a single second. This life, our life, It's better than anything I could have imagined back then. I was so lost when I came here, Press, and you helped me find myself. You gave me space to figure out who I wanted to be, and then you loved that person. How could I ever regret that? I was lost too, he admitted. Just going through the motions, existing but not really living. Then you showed up, this beautiful, complicated woman who challenged everything. And suddenly, I knew what I'd been waiting for. They made love on the blanket as the stars came out, taking their time, savoring each other the way only people who'd been together for years could. Afterward, they lay tangled together, talking about their children, about the school, about the dreams they still wanted to chase. I want to expand the school, Fiona said. Add more grades, maybe even classes beyond what's typical for elementary students. Some of these kids are so bright, Press. They deserve opportunities beyond mining or ranching if that's what they want. Do it. He kissed her temple. You've never needed my permission, but if you want my support, you have it. Always. Rose announced at 13 that she wanted to be a veterinarian, which shocked no one. She spent every spare moment at the ranch, helping with sick animals and assisting when mares foaled. Press taught her everything he knew, and when she was 15, they sent her to study with a veterinary surgeon in Tucson for a summer. She came back more determined than ever. Henry was quieter about his ambitions, but Fiona saw the way he devoured books, the way he filled notebooks with observations and questions. When he was 12, he told them he wanted to be a teacher like his mother. Fiona's heart nearly burst with pride. The children grew. The school grew. The ranch prospered. Press took over as full owner of the operation when Mr. Grayson retired, and he and Fiona suddenly found themselves pillars of the community, the kind of people others came to for advice and leadership. On their 20th anniversary, their children threw them a party. Half of Tombstone showed up, filling their house and spilling out into the yard. Sarah and Joseph were there, their own children now grown. Students Fiona had taught were there with children of their own. Cowboys Press had trained over the years came to pay their respects. Press pulled Fiona aside during the party, led her out to the porch where they could hear the celebration but have a moment of relative privacy. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose. 20 years, he said, pulling her close. Feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean. Fiona leaned against him, comfortable and content. Think we can manage another 20, at least. He kissed her deep and sweet. I love you, Fiona, more now than even on the day we married. You're better than dreams, she said softly, throwing his own words back at him. No, he smiled against her lips. We're better than dreams, what we built together, our life, our family. This is real. This is better than anything I could have dreamed. Rose left for university when she was 18, heading to California to study veterinary medicine properly. It was the first time Fiona understood how her cousin had felt sending her own children off into the world. The mix of pride and terror and desperate hope that you'd prepared them adequately for everything they'd face. Rose wrote home regularly, her letters full of excitement and homesickness in equal measure. Henry stayed in Tombstone, attending the expanded school Fiona had founded and then helping teach there when he turned 16. He had a gift for reaching difficult students, for finding ways to make lessons relevant and engaging. Fiona knew he'd surpass her as a teacher someday, and the thought filled her with joy rather than jealousy. Press's hair started going gray at his temples when he was 45, and Fiona teased him about becoming distinguished. Her own hair had threads of silver running through the auburn now, and her hands showed the years of work, but Press still looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. They made love less frequently than in their early years, but no less passionately. Their bodies knew each other perfectly now. every preference and sensitive spot mapped and memorized. Sometimes they'd surprise each other, trying something new just to prove they still could. More often, they'd fall into familiar patterns, comfort and excitement intertwined. Rose came home after 5 years with a degree and a job offer from a large ranch in southern Arizona. She took it, moving 4 hours away, far enough that visits required planning but close enough for regular contact. She met a cowboy there, fell in love fast and hard the way her parents had, and married him within a year. Fiona and Press attended the wedding, watching their fierce, brilliant daughter promise her life to a gentle man who clearly adored her and felt the circle completing. Henry married 3 years later, to a girl he'd known since childhood, a merchant's daughter who shared his love of books and quiet mornings. They built a house 2 miles from Fiona and Press's place, close enough to visit easily but far enough for independence. They talked about starting a new school together, something experimental and progressive. The grandchildren started arriving. Rose had twin boys first, wild and fearless like their mother. Henry and his wife had a daughter, then a son, then another daughter. Fiona found herself becoming the kind of grandmother she'd never had, teaching the little ones to read, taking them on walks through the desert, filling their heads with stories and possibilities. Press taught them all to ride, patient and thorough, never letting them get on a horse before they understood the responsibility involved. Watching him with the grandchildren, Fiona fell in love with him all over again, seeing the tenderness that had always been there but was less guarded now, more freely expressed. On their 30th anniversary, they took a trip, just the two of them, traveling to San Francisco to see the ocean. Fiona had never seen the Pacific, and standing on the beach with waves crashing and Press's hand in hers, she felt overwhelmed by the sheer size of the world and the life they'd carved out in it. "No regrets?" Press asked, echoing his question from 20 years earlier. "Not a single one." Fiona squeezed his hand. "Though I wouldn't mind another 30 years if we can manage it. I'll see what I can do." They walked along the beach for hours, talking about everything and nothing, comfortable in the way only people who'd spent decades together could be. That night in their hotel room, they made love with the sound of the ocean in the background, and Fiona thought about tides and time and the constancy of love. Back in Tombstone, life continued its steady rhythm. Press gradually trained a successor to take over the ranch, spending more time at home, more time with Fiona and the growing collection of grandchildren. Fiona cut back her teaching hours but never stopped entirely, too in love with the work to walk away completely. Sarah's husband Joseph passed away quietly in his sleep when they were all in their 60s, and Fiona held her cousin through the grief, understanding loss in a way she'd hoped never to experience again. Sarah moved into a smaller house closer to Fiona and Press, and they became each other's daily companions once more, the friendship of their youth deepening into something even more precious. Rose's twins grew up and started their own veterinary practice. Henry's oldest daughter became a doctor, inspired by stories of her great-uncle Joseph. The grandchildren married and had children of their own, and Fiona found herself teaching great-grandchildren, marveling at how much the world had changed since that day she'd stepped off a stage in Tombstone. Press's hair went fully white, and his hands developed arthritis that made some tasks difficult. Fiona's eyes weren't what they used to be, requiring glasses for reading. But they were healthy and happy and still deeply in love, still partners in every sense of the word. On their 50th anniversary, the entire family descended on Tombstone for a celebration. There were children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, a whole clan that had grown from that moment when a cowboy caught a falling woman and decided she was worth knowing. The party was enormous, taking over the town hall just like that first dance decades earlier. Fiona wore a blue dress, an echo of the one she'd worn that night, and Press wore his best suit. They danced together while their family watched, and Fiona felt the weight of years and love and choices that had led them here. Rose stood to give a toast, her voice strong and clear. My parents taught me that love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone real and choosing them every day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. They showed me that partnership means supporting each other's dreams, not sacrificing your own. They proved that you can build something lasting without losing yourself in the process. She raised her glass. To Fiona and Press, who are better than dreams, who showed us all what real love looks like. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Press pulled Fiona close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, overwhelmed by gratitude for this life, this family, this man who'd loved her exactly as she was. Later, after the party had wound down and most of the guests had gone home, Fiona and Press sat on their porch watching the stars. The desert night was cool and clear, the sky so full of stars it looked like someone had spilled diamonds across black velvet. 50 years, Fiona said softly. I can hardly believe it. Best 50 years of my life. Press squeezed her hand. Though that first week was pretty good too. Meeting you, falling for you, that whole whirlwind. You thought I was trouble from the start. I knew you were trouble from the start. That's why I couldn't stay away. He turned to look at her, and in the starlight, Fiona could see both the young cowboy he'd been and the man he'd become. You changed everything for me, Fiona. I was just existing before you. You taught me how to live. You did the same for me. She brought his hand to her lips, kissed his knuckles the way he'd done that night in her hotel room so long ago. I was so scared when I came here. Scared I'd made a mistake, scared I'd never find what I was looking for. And then there you were, here I am. His smile was tender, still here, always here. They sat together until the sky began to lighten toward dawn, talking about their life, their children, their grandchildren. They talked about the school, which had grown into one of the best in the territory. They talked about the ranch, thriving under new management but still bearing Press's mark in every decision. They talked about Tombstone, which had transformed from a rough frontier town into a real community, with families and futures and hope. You think we did all right? Fiona asked as the sun crested the horizon, painting the world gold, with everything, our lives, our children, all of it. Press pulled her closer, and she settled against him with the ease of decades. I think we did better than all right. I think we built something real and good and lasting. I think we loved each other well and raised children who know how to love well too. I think we made the world a little bit better just by being in it together. You're better than dreams, Fiona whispered. So are you, love, so are you. The sun rose fully, chasing away the last shadows of night. A new day was beginning, one of thousands they'd spent together, and would continue spending together for whatever time they had left. Fiona watched the light spread across the desert and thought about that scared young woman who'd stepped off a stage in Tombstone 50 years ago, running toward something she couldn't name. She'd found it, found him, found herself, found home. And it had been better, so much better than any dream she could have imagined. The years continued their steady march forward. Press and Fiona grew older with grace, their bodies slowing but their minds still sharp, still engaged with the world around them. They took daily walks together through the desert they'd always loved, moving slower now but seeing more, noticing details they might have missed in younger, busier years. The school celebrated its 50th anniversary, and Fiona was honored as its founder. Former students came from across the territory to pay tribute, doctors and lawyers and teachers and ranchers, all crediting her with giving them the foundation for their success. She accepted their praise with humility, crediting the community that had supported the school and the children who'd made teaching such a joy. Press was honored, too, by the Territorial Agricultural Association for his innovations in desert ranching and his decades of training young cowboys in ethical, sustainable practices. He gave a short speech, thanking the Graysons for taking a chance on a Texas cowboy, thanking his family for their support, and saving his final thanks for Fiona. "My wife taught me that building something that lasts requires patience and love and the willingness to keep showing up, even when it's hard," he said. "She taught me that by being my partner for over 50 years, and I'm grateful for every single day." They were in their 70s now, and while their health remained good, they both understood that time was precious. They made a point of spending it intentionally, visiting their children and grandchildren regularly, hosting Sunday dinners that filled their house with noise and love, taking time each evening to sit together and watch the sunset. Sarah passed away peacefully at 78, surrounded by her children. Fiona grieved deeply, losing the cousin who'd been more like a sister, who'd welcomed her to Tombstone all those years ago and helped her build a life here. Press held her through the grief, understanding that some losses cut so deep that all you could do was survive them together. But life continued, insisting on itself the way it always did. Great-great-grandchildren were born. Rose's veterinary practice expanded into 3 locations. Henry's experimental school became a model that other towns wanted to replicate. The family tree that had started with Fiona and Press now included dozens of branches, a whole forest of people connected by love and blood and choice. On their 60th anniversary, they had a quiet celebration, just immediate family. Fiona was 83, Press was 87, and they'd both slowed considerably. But their minds were clear, and their love was as strong as ever. Rose brought out a leather-bound book she'd been working on for months, a family history she'd compiled from letters and journals and interviews. She'd titled it Better Than Dreams, the story of Fiona and Press. "I wanted to capture it," Rose said, tears in her eyes. "Everything you built, everything you meant to us, so that your great-great-grandchildren and their children will know where they came from, will know what real love looks like." Fiona paged through the book with shaking hands, seeing her life laid out in words and pictures. Photos of the school, of the ranch, of their children at various ages. Copies of letters she and Press had written to each other during their few separations over the years. Testimonials from students and ranch hands and community members about the impact they'd had. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Thank you, sweetheart." That night, after everyone had gone home, Fiona and Press sat in their bed, the family history open between them. They read through it slowly, remembering, laughing, occasionally crying at the sweetness of memory. "We did good," Press said finally, closing the book gently. "Didn't we? We did great." Fiona leaned against him. "I love you, Preston Garrett. I've loved you for 60 years, and I'll love you for whatever time we have left. And beyond that," Press said, "if there's anything after this, I'll find you there too." They fell asleep like that, wrapped around each other, the family history resting on the nightstand like a testament to a life well lived. Press passed away quietly 2 years later in his sleep, with Fiona beside him. He was 89, and his heart simply stopped, worn out from a lifetime of hard work and deep feeling. Fiona woke to find him gone, and the grief was a physical thing, a weight on her chest that made breathing difficult. The family gathered for the funeral, dozens of people whose lives Press had touched. They buried him in the Tombstone cemetery with a view of the desert he'd loved, under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Fiona stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and said goodbye to the man who'd been her partner for 6 decades. The weeks after were the hardest of Fiona's life, harder even than losing her parents. The house felt empty without Press, the silence oppressive. She'd wake in the night reaching for him, forgetting for a moment that he was gone, and the remembering would break her heart all over again. But slowly, gradually, with the support of her family and the structure of her routines, Fiona found her way back to something like peace. She couldn't teach anymore, her body too frail for the daily demands, but she tutored individual students in her home. She wrote letters to her grandchildren and great-grandchildren, sharing stories and wisdom. She tended a small garden and took short walks when the weather permitted. And she remembered. She spent hours with the family history Rose had made, reliving her life with Press. She pulled out old letters and read them, hearing his voice in the words. She looked at photographs and felt gratitude for every year, every moment they'd had together. One evening, 6 months after Press's death, Fiona sat on her porch watching the sunset. The sky was doing something spectacular, layers of orange and pink and purple stacked like silk scarves. She could almost feel Press beside her, could almost hear him saying something about the beauty of the desert. "You were right," she said aloud to the empty air. "You were better than dreams. What we had, what we built, it was all better than anything I could have imagined." The wind picked up, warm and gentle, and Fiona chose to believe it was him, acknowledging her words. She sat until full dark, wrapped in memories and love, and felt at peace. Fiona lived for 3 more years after Press's death, remaining clear-minded and engaged until the very end. She passed away at 90, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, slipping away peacefully in her sleep on a warm spring morning. They buried her beside Press, under the same endless sky. The funeral drew people from across the state, former students now grandparents themselves, ranch hands Press had trained who'd gone on to successful careers, community leaders whose paths had been shaped by the school Fiona founded. Rose gave the eulogy, her voice strong despite her tears. "My mother used to say she came to Tombstone running toward something she couldn't name. She found it in my father, in this community, in the life they built together. They showed us that love isn't about finding perfection. It's about finding someone real and choosing them every single day. They were better than dreams, both of them, and we're all better for having known them." The family gathered after the service. Multiple generations crowded into the house Fiona and Press had built. They shared stories and laughter and tears, celebrating 2 lives that had touched so many others. In the family history Rose had compiled, she'd included a final entry written by Fiona in the last year of her life. It read, "If I could go back and tell that scared young woman on the stage to Tombstone anything, I would tell her this: trust yourself, trust your instincts. When you find something real, something that makes you feel alive and whole and yourself, hold on to it with both hands. I found that in Press, in our children, in this community, in the work of teaching. I found it in the desert sunsets and the quiet mornings and the ordinary miracle of building a life with someone you love. I was better than I dreamed I could be, and it was because I was loved well and learned to love well in return. That's all any of us can hope for. To love well and be loved well and leave the world a little better than we found it. Press and I did that. Together, we did that. And I'm grateful for every single moment." Years passed. The school continued, now named the Keller Garrett Academy in honor of its founders. The ranch prospered under new generations of management, still following the principles Press had established. The family grew and scattered but maintained strong connections, gathering regularly to remember their matriarch and patriarch. to tell stories of Fiona and Press to children who'd never met them, but who carried their legacy in their genes and their values. On what would have been Fiona and Press's 70th anniversary, the family gathered at the cemetery. Rose, now elderly herself, stood before the graves with her children and grandchildren around her. "They were better than dreams," she said, echoing the phrase that had defined her parents' love. "And because of them, because of what they built and who they were, we're all better too. We carry them forward in the choices we make, in the way we love, in the lives we build. They're not gone as long as we remember them, as long as we love the way they loved." The sun set behind them, painting the desert in shades of gold and rose, the colors Fiona had loved. The family stood together, connected by love and blood and the legacy of two people who'd met by chance and chosen each other, who'd built something real and lasting and better than any dream. In Tombstone, in the house that still stood on the edge of the desert, in the school that continued teaching new generations, in the ranch that still ran cattle across the same land, the echoes of Fiona and Press remained. Not as ghosts, but as foundations, as the bedrock on which others built their own lives and loves. They had run towards something they couldn't name and found it in each other. They had been real and complicated and imperfect, and had loved each other through all of it. They had been, as Press had said that first night, better than dreams. And their story, their love, their legacy continued on.